finished one of the Mordheim boards. Finally. Let's have a look at it, see how I made it, and see how awesome it looks. See you in a minute. Off camera before I started, I had stuck all of the buildings down using contact adhesive, so I used no nails or whatever your local equivalent is. And where I'd stuck them in, I wanted to integrate the walls, particularly of this building in the corner. I wanted to integrate the walls with the terrain. So I used some of my XPS foam bricks that I'd cut out, which handily were the same size already. I didn't have to cut any special ones out, but they were the same size as the bricks actually on the 3D printed building. If you've not seen where I 3D printed these buildings, check out the video that I'm putting up in the top corner now. Goes through, you know, how I printed them, why I printed them, and kind of having a look around them. So I got all of those stuck in. I put a little motif there that I'd built with some skulls. Again, I've done a separate short video on how I made that because I used a silicone mold and a new silicone mold tool that I was really happy with. So I've kind of put a quick review video together, and that'll be coming up probably in the next week or so. Once I've done that, I'll come back and I'll put a link there. But if not, just subscribe to the channel and you'll find it. Don't forget, if you do subscribe to the channel as well, click that bell so that you get all of the alerts, because a lot of my videos are getting a lot of views, but not as many views as I've got subscribers, so I don't know if they're just not being shown to people, but if you click that bell, then you will get alerted whenever I upload a new video. As always, building anything with individual bricks is a bit arduous. I've sped this up a little bit, but I think I just wanted to kind of show how I integrated it into the ground formation. I'm really pleased with how this looked actually at the end. I think it looked really good. Then I moved on to using XPS to make some steps. Now this board is going to join with another one along this edge, so those steps are going to continue onto the other board. If you've not watched my very first Mordheim board video, again I'll put the link up here. I'm working on building 6 individual boards that I can use for my writing workshops individually, but that I can then put together for big battles, whether it's Mordheim, whether it's Frostgrave, whether it's anything in that kind of theme really. So these boards will join together, but they also have to work individually on their own as a 2.5 foot by 2.5 foot size thing. So this one, I put the steps there, and again that's the cast from one of the little motifs that I made, and I'm going to use those in various different bits through the other boards just to kind of keep that theme going through really, I think. When I was building these walls, in particular this retaining wall, I used contact adhesive rather than a hot glue gun because I found that the contact adhesive sticks them better to the plaster, which I've put on the hill using sculptor mold, which I did way before I started this video. I kind of sculpted those initial hills to see how it would work. And I just wanted something that would stick well. Hot glue doesn't stick so well to the sculptor mold. Super glue is fine, but it gets all over my fingers when I'm trying to stick bricks with it. So I just went with contact adhesive because it holds it really nicely in place. It takes a while to dry and to set, but actually the things don't move around or slip or anything like that because it is quite grabby. So I did the same thing with the slabs, and these are the same size slabs as on the other board that will join along this edge, so it should tie in nicely. One of the videos I'm going to do in the next few weeks is kind of a catch-up for that first initial Mordheim video I did, to show where the boards are now and how I want to kind of go back and change some little bits and things like that, kind of an update. So you'll get to see those all join together and how they all tie in. In the coming weeks, so keep an eye out for that as well. Then again, starting to build these hills out. This was a little bit freeform. I'm not really sure what I wanted these hills to be like at this point, so I used some contact adhesive, went around with some plaster rocks that I'd made using the Woodland Scenic molds. You can see in the background there are some bits of bark which I cut in half, and I used those, but I lost the footage for that. I couldn't find that when I came to edit the video, but again it just works the same. You'll see it a bit later on when I come to paint it, I think, but those bits of bark work really well. I just found those on I can't remember where I found them, just on a website somewhere that was selling them. And then, because I'm clumsy, I broke this part where I had I'd cut out some of it, because these boards can only be 20 centimetres high, absolute maximum. And when I put the building onto the top of the foam as it was about 22 centimetres. And the reason they have to be 20 centimetres is because that's the size of the boxes that I've got to store them in and to transport them to schools for the workshops and things like that. And they're standard boxes that I've got, so I don't want to have to go and get different size boxes. So I cut into the hill a little bit to kind of nestle this building in, and then obviously weakened the polystyrene enough that it just crumbled and snapped there where the underground tunnel was. So I had to fix it. And the easiest way I could think of to do that was to create some splints using thick lollipop sticks. Again, a bit more contact adhesive, and just stick those splints down, really, and then cover them all up with more sculptor mold. And surprisingly, this worked really well. Later on, off camera, I did put some wooden struts into the tunnel as well, just because I didn't want it to break in the future, even though the whole thing was covered in sculptor mold and was pretty solid. I just put some struts in because I figured, well, people would put struts in real life and it works quite nicely. But sometimes these things just go completely wrong like this, and you have to find a way to, well, just to fix it really and to almost bodge it together. So a bit of sculptor mold over all of that. And once it was set and I'd sculptor molded so actually it's not sculptor mold, I should say, it's the Geek Gaming Scenics modelling compound. I just say sculptor mold as standard, but yeah, it's the Geek Gaming stuff, which is a lot stronger and dries a lot quicker, and is a lot cheaper. So definitely go get that stuff. Mix of sand and tile grout, and I think a little bit of plaster of Paris as well, casting plaster I put in here as well, just to help it really set. Brushed all of that into the cracks in between the slabs. And this works really well because even once it's sealed, it still absorbs paint and colour. So when I give the slabs an oil wash, that oil wash soaks into the plaster, it soaks into the tile grout and stains it as a dark, murky black, which is kind of that is the colour that old grout will be between tiles in city centres or town centres, village centres, whatever you want to call it. Then the whole thing just sealed with isopropyl alcohol and my homemade scenic sealant. So it's a similar one to Luke Towen's mix, but I do it by eye rather than specific measurements. It's about 3 parts Mod Podge, 1 part matte varnish, and then 1 or 2 parts water until it's liquid enough to use, really. Okay, part of the problem with putting the plaster on after I painted all of this is the fact that there's now plaster over everything. So it should be quite easy to get rid of it. I'm just going to go over it with a toothbrush and try and scrub everything off with a bit of water. Hopefully the plaster's still soft enough it'll all come off. If not, I can go over it with some washes later and it'll tie it back in, but they should work. Once that was all done and dusted and dried, I went over all of the modelling compound areas. Wait, to be fair, I also went over all of the XPS foams all over all the slabs and the steps with a mix of brown paint and Mod Podge. I did brown paint rather than black because I wanted this to be the dirt colour underneath. I also went over the slabs and the steps in the same stuff because I couldn't be bothered to also mix some black paint with some Mod Podge because it'd just be a waste of Mod Podge. So I just went over it with brown. I knew I'd be painting them grey and oil washing them anyway, so just added dirt. I then put a mix of the same stuff as I'd used between the tiles over the brown paint with the idea that it would give it a dirt texture. And it didn't. It was too bright. I probably needed darker grout or some actual dirt, but it's absolutely chucking it down here in the UK at the minute, and finding dry dirt is just not going to happen. But what I did do as a happy little accident, as Bob Ross would say,
we don't make mistakes, we have happy accidents,
was once I'd kind of scattered it all over using the sieve, I went back in with my brush and mixed more of the brown Mod Podge and the grout and the stuff underneath it all together, and it kind of made a homemade dirt texture, which you can kind of see there. So instead of having to buy mud texture paint, it just made a similar kind of thing. So I'll probably use that in the future, but do it in a bowl or a dish or something like that first. So then I stippled on some grey paint using a sponge onto the slabs. I wanted some of the brown to show through because at this point I was kind of thinking it actually looks quite nice like a dirt. So I didn't paint them grey, I just went over and stippled it. So even here with the brush, I'm just stippling the grey on rather than trying to kind of paint every single brick, because I just think, you know, it gives it a nice varied texture. Otherwise they all end up looking absolutely the same. And I went over all of the bricks, or all of the foam bricks, to try and tie them in with the bricks on the building as well above them, and over the rocks and things like that as well, just to give those a grey kind of base coat underneath them all. Okay, so the hills here I'm happy with. I think they will be natural. When they're covered in grass and stuff like that, they'll all be fine. But these slopes over here I don't love. I think they would collapse in real life. So what I'm going to do is use a load of these coffee stir sticks. I'm going to try and build some buttresses around it so it looks like the whoever's left in this city, in this town, have gone around and they've structured it all up, they've shored it all up. So use coffee stir sticks, can use some balsa wood, and we'll use a hot glue gun and we'll try and stick it all together and see what it looks like. This proved to be a bit of a pain in the backside. I went against my earlier advice and tried to use a hot glue gun to stick these on, and it just started pulling away at the paint, pulling away at the plaster in the modelling compound, so it just didn't really work. So what I did instead was resorted to the modelling compound itself and just put another layer of modelling compound on, pushed all of the wood into it, and the ones that I'd already hot glued on, I kind of worked modelling compound behind them, so it looked like they were actually kind of pushed and had grown into the mud almost. And then I went back over and painted all of the mud brown. I put another rock in there as well because there was a little bit of a bare spot of mud. So this was a bit of extra work that a bit of planning up ahead would have avoided if I'd have kind of thought this through at the beginning. Getting a lot of my elbow there. But then once it was done like that, I just kind of tied it back in with the brown paint, and you couldn't tell that it was a separate job, especially when I give it an oil wash later on. It ties it all in nicely. This is the point where you really need to kind of trust the system and know, okay, this is going to end up all right in the end if I keep going and trust myself. A black oil wash fixes so many different problems. It stained the wood nicely. I hadn't put a base coat underneath. I just left it as the bare coffee stir wood. And I went over everything. I didn't go over all of the soil with the oil wash because I didn't want it to just all be uniform. I just put that in splodges. So where it kind of pulled off of the wood like that, I left it. I painted over it. You can see there's some little bits where the white modelling compound is still showing through the brown paint and the texture paint that I made. So I covered that with the oil wash. But what I wanted to do more than anything was just get variation in the soil at this point. Bits that looked wetter than others, bits that looked darker. And even though a lot of it ends up being covered up, it does show in enough places that actually I'm really glad that I did that. It worked well. Once I put the oil wash on, I went through and dabbed it all up. And now this job should have been done before the oil wash, but I forgot. So I had to give it a bit of an oil wash afterwards. But I went through and used some of the Too Thin Coats kind of flesh colours and browns and things like that. Normally I'd use hobby acrylics to do things like terrain, but these were such small areas that I wanted to use high pigment paints that would just go on and look really good. And the idea here is that you just make some of the bricks look a little bit different in colour, and it gives the impression that the whole wall is kind of varied, even though most of the bricks are the same colour because I just dabbled them all the same grey. Doing this, it just sells it slightly different. So yeah, using the Too Thin Coats, which are really highly pigmented anyway, just made it so much easier. And again, doing some of the XPS bricks and some of the 3D printed bricks just helps to tie them in. And when you look at it, you can't tell where the 3D printing stuff ends and where the XPS foam bricks begin, which is exactly the look I was going for. So I'm really pleased with how that turned out. And I gave them all over a black oil wash afterwards as well, just to tie them back in. Then I sealed everything with a heck load of scenic sealant and isopropyl alcohol. I need to get a better spray bottle for the isopropyl alcohol. This works all right, but it makes my finger really hurt. So just absolutely soaked it because I just wanted everything at this point to be really, really solid so that anything I built on top would kind of stick to it properly. The modelling compound wasn't going to peel away. it was just going to work brilliantly. And I dragged my daughter in, and we started having a look at the hedges and how we're going to use these. Now, these are they're a material from Woodland Scenic. I can't remember what it's called, but they are kind of really thick sponge-like trees or hedge material. I can't remember what it's called, but it crumbles really easily, which was really annoying. It was great for getting shapes, but it just kept on falling to bits. So I tried to cover the whole thing with Mod Podge, tried to squeeze it down, and it was all right. But what I ended up having to do for a lot of it was just drill into the board, drill through the modelling compound, glue in some kebab sticks, some wooden kebab stir sticks, whatever they're called, and then push the hedging material down onto those. I still then had to go back and super glue a lot of the extra bits on that were falling off. Then I ended up drowning all of the hedges just completely in really fluid super glue. And then I soaked the whole thing in the sealant, and by the end of it, they're pretty solid, but it did take a lot of work to get them solid. So then I roped my daughter in again to help with the paths. So she went round and just created some paths where we kind of figured people would walk. A lot of this is just made up as you go along. It's just, right, where will people walk? Where are they likely to tread that is going to wear down any grass? And then we used some of the Geek Gaming base ready mixes to put on there, a mix of all different ones. We stuck some grass tufts down with some super glue. I used some of the Woodland Scenic stuff to make the creeping vines, which I've used in previous videos. And this was just kind of tying in everything except for the static grass, which is going to come next. So, well, not quite next, because we needed to seal everything once again. So we went through, sealed all of that down. I think in the end I gave the bushes about 4 coats of the Scenic sealant, a coat of really liquid super glue. Now they're pretty solid. The real test, as always, will be whether kind of the children manage to knock them off in the workshops. We shall see. I'm not optimistic, but you never know. But this sealed everything down. It's very cold here in the UK at the minute, so even with the heater on in the studio, it took probably a good day for everything to dry properly. Then I gave my daughter a lesson in how to static grass. This was fun. It's quite nice to get her involved as well, get my oldest daughter involved. My youngest daughter's probably not quite old enough yet to do this kind of stuff. But, you know, it's nice to get the family involved. And these things take a long time to do, so it's a long time away from family. So if I can get them involved, it's even better. And we just went around and covered everything with static grass, and then hoovered it back up using the old sock over the end method to try and collect as much as we could. And once we'd kind of put all the static grass down, you'll never guess what comes next. It is our favourite step of all. More sealant. This, I didn't do the whole board. I kind of just sealed the grass here because everything else had enough and was pretty saturated. So I just went over the grass. I think I went back over the hedges again at this point, using the isopropyl alcohol, as always, just to break that surface tension so that it really runs down to the base of the grass and sticks it down to the Mod Podge. Then I had the brilliant idea that I wanted to put some LEDs into the board. There's a fireplace in the building, which I thought would look quite cool with a flickering LED. In the end, I didn't get a flickering LED in there because my flickering LEDs are too big. It's a lot of times to say flickering LEDs in a few sentences. But I ended up putting a normal LED, like a micro LED in there, and then painting it with some contrast paints just to give it an orange hue. And I wanted another one in the tunnel underneath as well. So this was kind of a case of, right, I need to measure where the fireplace is, try and drill a perfect hole through the bottom, a perfect hole through the bottom of the fireplace, going back down into the board, and it's probably no surprise that they didn't line up perfectly. However, they weren't far off. I was close enough that I don't massively regret doing it, but it was a bit of a pain, a bit stressful. You've got a really good shot there of me drilling down to the fireplace. I'm glad of how much detail you can really see happening there. Suffice to say, I was going very slow, so I didn't suddenly drop in and smash into the 3D printed building and break it all, because I would have cried at that point. I tried various ways to get the hole through, but I was slightly off centre. It wasn't going to happen. yeah, it was just a bit of a pain, a bit of finagling. So in the end, I had to use a bigger drill to widen the hole a couple of times. Okay, so this bit is going to be quite tricky, so I'm going to do this off camera. But I'm going to thread a blinking LED through there, and then through the metal tube that I put in there, I'm going to try and thread some very thin wires and solder on an LED to fit there to make a flickering fire. So I'm going to do all that off camera because it's going to be really tricky, and I don't think I'll be able to get a good camera angle of it anyway. Let's see how we get on with it, and I'll show you when it's finished. So you'll see those LEDs at the end in the reveal. Before I did all of that, just to kind of finish everything off, I wanted to add some posters. These are amazing posters that Leif over at Devs and Dice has made. Definitely go and check out his channel. He's, you know, pretty much the Mordheim terrain board king. The stuff he does is phenomenal. And he gave these posters away to, you know, his YouTube followers, so they were brilliant. I thought, you know what, they work so well, they tie in with the ones I've used on the other boards as well. Let's just stick with what we know, stick with what works. So I just dotted those around a little bit, just to kind of give it a lived-in feel, and then I painted up some shields to stick onto the buildings, and after that it was time for you to see how it all ended up.